Welcome back. My guest is David Maimela, a former student activist. We are talking about how we can dismantle patriarchy that seeks to stunt women's growth and development in the political sphere. Before we continue with our conversation, David, I would like just to read a few messages from social media. Wonga Masiza on Facebook says, there is no patriarchy. This patriarchy being fought is a straw man. Simiso Dlamini says, patriarchy is not the problem. You can answer the Facebook comments.
Well, am I supposed to answer?
I think let's engage them. What do you think?
I think it's quite sad that there are people who believe patriarchy is not real.
Yeah.
Patriarchy does exist. It's a system of privilege,
yes,
and it must be dismantled. Because you see, all that well-meaning and progressive activists across the world they ask themselves a simple and a basic question. What can I do every day practically and in principle and in theory? What can I do every day to affirm the humanity of the other? So, if you say women must be emancipated, you are saying, when you say the downtrodden must be emancipated, when you say there should be no violence against children and women, you are basically saying the humanity that you enjoy, the ubuntu, the humanness that you enjoy as a man, with the added advantage of privilege,
yes,
should be equally enjoyed by, the opposite sex. And that's not a difficult ask. That's not a difficult task. And I think society is just, struggling to get there. But I think there have been strides, as I was saying. There's movement forward. There's a new generation of young women that are coming up.
Yes. And you're saying, I'm sorry to disturb that. You're saying that society is struggling to actually adopt that type of a mentality. And do you think, me and you, we belong to the African National Congress. Do you think, in terms of the quotas that we've come, up with, you've came up with quotas in SASCO. When you were leading SASCO, you were at the helm of SASCO. Do you think, to some extent, they are assisting, in as far as, unlearning the cultural, elements that, further perpetuate a patriarchy, or as a liberation movement, we are also found wanting, because there's been a lot of, 50-50 quotas. Women in the ANC make up 60% representation of those that, are given delegation powers to go and vote, for leadership, because electing leaders plays a role in as far as who makes the decisions at the end of the day, because the governing body, it's from the governing party, and it's a governing party, a political party that goes to conferences. So do you think, to some extent, our ANC is failing us in that regard?
Men have been given a chance to volunteer to make sure that the space is equally shared.
Yes.
Now, if you don't give privilege, which is also a system of power, if you want to give them space to volunteer, you are giving them a blank check. You've got to insist that this is the minimum standard. Because, like I'm saying, you've got to force it. You've got to force privilege to concede. And you've got to shift it by, putting particular parameters, insisting on particular principles, insisting on particular, limits and progress that, has got to be made. You can't have a situation where, when you have got privilege being stubborn, and then, you just hope that, these men are going to volunteer to do away with patriarchy. It's not going to happen. They've had centuries to do that. They haven't done it. And I think that the quotas, as a minimum requirement, not a maximum, a minimum requirement, are actually quite a good thing.
Okay. I think we've got a caller online, Asanda from Chris from Benoni. Chris, you're welcome to the show. What is it that you'd like to ask our guest?
Okay, thanks, Tlangi. First of all, I think we must always be clear that sometimes gender parity in and of itself is not gender equality. But having said that, David, I would like to put you on the spot here. Tlangi says in the opening statement, so she alludes to something along the lines that Comrade Winnie Madikizela Mandela, the late, was subjected to a great deal of patriarchy within the movement. Let's even call it patriarchal abuse. Do you agree with that?
Yes, no, I do agree.
Can you elaborate? I mean, to what extent? Don't you think it's an overarching statement? I would say it's an overarching statement.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that there has been a lot of debate that, I mean, there was a lost opportunity. I think some people say, and I do agree that, you know, she's a president that we never had. I think, I mean, she was loved by the people. She was quite a legitimate leader. She was forthright. She had achieved a lot, more than many other men, by the way. And she was ahead, you know, in many regards. And I think that she could have, you know, easily ascended as early as 1997 or even soon after that. So I agree just on that one aspect. But I also then agree that society as a whole sought to punish her. I mean, as you saw, you know, in the days leading up to a funeral, sought to punish her for things that were blatantly untrue. I mean, the media space itself is, you know, predominantly white, male, you know, and patriarchal. So, I mean, it's been saying all these wrong narratives about her.
Right. Thanks, Asanda. Chris, we've got Asanda now from Cape Town. Asanda, welcome to the show. What is your question?
Greetings, Tlangi, and good evening, David. So my question would be on the fact that, so as the African National Congress, we speak at length about these interrelated, interconnected, and mutually reinforcing contradictions in our NDR, that being of class, race, and gender. So when we contextualize this, we're able to speak at length about the racial contradiction, the national question. When we look at our class contradiction, we're able to contextualize colonialism of a special type. But when we get to the gender aspect, you find that more often than not, we are found wanting as the organization. So my question for David would be, how can we reconcile this contradiction in the context of the society that we live in currently, within this interrelatedness of the three contradictions? Thank you.
The African National Congress has had a lot of policy conferences, and some of them speak directly to what Asanda is speaking about. Do you believe, as she's asking correctly, is there political will from the ANC to actually fix these things? I think that is how I understand Asanda's question.
Well, the character of the ANC describes itself as progressive, and you know, among other things, it you know, affirms you know, the need to fight against patriarchy, gender inequality, and all of that. Which is a good base from which to start. But you've got to accept that, as I was saying, you know, there is a century-long system here of privilege. You know, in order, it's a social structure, right? It excludes, it decides who must be in, who must be out. And so the ANC itself, just like any other political party, the DA, the EFF, and so on, all of them have got to commit and recommit to this struggle. And women within those spaces should assume their agency without fear or favor, and they should, you know, carry on, push on to make sure that there is equality across the board.
Thank you so much, Asanda. I hope your question is answered. Now, David, just before we go to another break, I just wanted to, you know, get this one out of the way. The role of ANC women and those that have been empowered, because I want to believe that, you know, the battle against patriarchy is a bit broad, and there is also an issue around those that have been empowered, those that have benefited from, you know, posturing as, you know, advocates of, you know, the empowerment of women, but they themselves, in fact, get consumed by the system. I don't want to call it patriarchy of a special type, but they themselves become, consumed by the system. In a way, they become, the agents of patriarchy. They sideline other women. They block doors. They're empowered, and for them, empowerment ends with them. What is your view?
Yeah, no, I think the struggle against patriarchy is multifaceted, and it takes, its manifestation changes, from time to time. It can manifest itself in that way, that, a certain section of women in a political party or in society are themselves agents of the very same system that is supposed to be dismantled. Mm-hmm. And I think that, that the women have got to be conscious about that, and they've got to raise it too amongst them. So that's why one of the tasks that must happen is that amongst women themselves, in my humble view, is that they must raise amongst themselves the consciousness about all these things. The one example that you're mentioning, about how this thing can manifest itself even amongst themselves. And therefore be able to say, how do we guard against such things that can even cripple the very same struggle?
Okay. Thank you, David. How do we dismantle this bad practice? We'll be back with more on that conversation.